Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Naila Shuja and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has tested positive for COVID-19. In a tweet, the Prime Minister's Special Assistant on National Health Services, Faisal Sultan, said PM Khan is currently self-isolating at his home. Pakistan has recorded its highest daily spike in cases in 8 months, with 3,876 infections since yesterday. Meanwhile, India's daily coronavirus infections have surged to 4-month high as it reported nearly 41,000 new cases overnight. Globally, the number of COVID-19 deaths has surpassed 2.7 million, with more than 122 million infections. Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin has raised the issue of India's human rights violations with Indian ministers during his visit to New Delhi. Earlier, a key U.S. senator said India-United States ties must rest on New Delhi's adherence to democratic values. Austin is the first ever U.S. Defense Secretary to include India on his maiden foreign trip with eye on China. Kabul says it calls for the acceleration in peace talks, an immediate end to violence, and a comprehensive ceasefire in Afghanistan. On return from Moscow conference, Afghanistan's top negotiator Abdullah said the event was a step forward to boost the Doha talks and support Turkey's meeting on Afghanistan. Earlier, Pakistan repeated its resolve to facilitate a political settlement in Afghanistan, but warned against the role of spoilers. Arab coalition says it has destroyed another Houthi drone launched towards Saudi Arabia. The coalition says the explosive laden drone was intercepted over the southern Saudi city of Hamas Mushahid. It comes after Riyadh accused Tehran of supporting Yemeni rebels' attacks on the kingdom. In Myanmar, another protester has been killed during anti-coup demonstrations in Yangon. Activists say 238 protesters have been killed in the military crackdown since the February 1st coup. Meanwhile, Twitter has suspended the Information Ministry's account under its manipulation and spam policy. Top-seeded Stefanos Tsitsipas and second-seeded Alexander Zverev have reached the final of the Mexican Open in Acapulco. World number 5 Tsitsipas beat Italian qualifier Lorenzo Musetti 6-1, 6-3 in their final 4 contests. Earlier, Germany's Alexander Zverev eased past compatriot Dominic Koepfer 6-4, 7-6 in the semi-final. The two will duel for the ATP title on Sunday. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has tested positive for COVID-19. In a tweet, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on National Health Services, Faisal Sultan, said PM Khan is currently self-isolating at his home. Khan received the first shot of his COVID-19 vaccine on Thursday. Meanwhile, Pakistan also recorded its highest daily spike in cases in 8 months, with 3,876 overnight infections. The country's caseload has reached over 623,000, while the number of fatalities has reached almost 13,800. Pakistan's positivity ratio has jumped to nearly 10%. The number of global coronavirus deaths has surpassed 2.7 million, while the caseload has exceeded 122 million. Brazil has reported the highest single-day cases, with more than 90,000 people testing positive overnight, while some 2,800 more people lost their lives in the country, the second highest number of deaths in one day. More in this report.
The health, economic and political complications prompted by the coronavirus pandemic are worsening by the day. A cohort of global scientists led by King's College London said there is growing evidence that COVID-19 can cause diabetes in some patients. In South America, many nations are facing an acute health crisis. Ecuador's health minister has resigned after less than 3 weeks on the job as prosecutors investigate allegations of favoritism in the rollout of vaccines. Meanwhile, Mexico's president thanked his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden for agreeing to provide 2.7 million vaccines. In the U.S., Dr. Anthony Fauci says the more contagious and likely more deadly variants linked to the U.K. is rapidly spreading in the U.S.
And that relates to the threat of a variant of concern, particularly the B.1.1.7 variant, which right now, as we know, is causing a significant degree of concern in Europe, where the flare and the surge that they are seeing is directly related to the variant 1.1.7. This variant, as you know, is every day getting more and more dominant.
Germany's health minister has warned of vaccine scarcity in Europe to contain the third wave of COVID-19. More countries are resuming the use of AstraZeneca's vaccine after assurances that its benefits outweigh the risks. Meanwhile, the UK and French prime ministers have received their first shots of the Oxford jab.
I really don't. I think you should listen. Don't just listen to me. Listen to all the scientists. Listen to what the European Medicines Agency had to say yesterday, to what the MHRA has said. The risk is COVID. This is a great thing to do.
Meanwhile, India has recorded over 40,000 new COVID-19 cases, the highest in 4 months.
Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin says he raised the issue of India's human rights violations with Indian ministers during his visit to New Delhi. Responding to a media inquiry, he said human rights and the rule of law is important to the United States. Prior to his visit, U.S. Senator Robert Menendez expressed concerns over the deteriorating solution of the democracy in India. He also slammed India's crackdown on protesting farmers and its actions in occupied Kashmir. The senator said India-United States ties must rest on New Delhi's adherence to democratic values. Austin is the first ever U.S. Defense Secretary to include India on his maiden foreign trip with eye on China. Meanwhile, hundreds of farmers have left northern Punjab to join the protest against the centre's contentious farm laws along Delhi borders. During the journey on tractors, the farmers raised slogans against the federal government. Many farmers, accompanied by their families, have camped at 3 sites on the outskirts of the Indian capital. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government offered to suspend the laws for 18 months, but the farmers have refused to back down, demanding the repeal of reforms they say will jeopardize their living. Kabul says it calls for the acceleration in peace talks, an immediate end to violence, and a comprehensive ceasefire in Afghanistan. Kabul's top negotiator Abdullah said this on his return from the Moscow conference. Abdullah said the event was a step forward to boost the Doha talks and support Turkey's meeting on Afghanistan. He also lauded the joint statement of the extended troika on peaceful Afghan settlement. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi warned against the role of spoilers in the peace process. Speaking to his Afghan counterpart Hanif Atmar over the phone, Qureshi said all sides must work constructively for a peaceful Afghanistan. Despite the peace process, the Taliban and the government have reported casualties of the other side in attacks on different parts of the country. In Myanmar, another protester has been killed during anti-coup demonstrations in Yangon. It comes amid increased international pressure on the military generals to shun violence. 2 more people were killed overnight after soldiers opened fire in the northern ruby mining town of Mogok. Meanwhile, Twitter has suspended the Information Ministry's account under its manipulation and spam policy. Earlier, UN Rapporteur Tom Andrews called for sanctions in response to the Army's ruthless attacks. In another development, the U.S. House of Representatives has approved legislation condemning the military coup. Activists say 238 protesters have been killed in the military crackdown since the 1st of February. The Arab coalition says it has destroyed another Houthi drone launched towards Saudi Arabia. The coalition says the explosive Laden drone was intercepted over the southern Saudi city of Khamis Mashahid. Earlier, Riyadh accused Iran of supporting Yemeni rebels' attacks on the kingdom. In an interview, Saudi Minister for State of Foreign Affairs Abdul al-Jubair said Houthis carried out the attacks using Iranian weapons. Al-Jubair said that the presence of what he called the Iranian-backed separatists does not mean the peace is impossible in Yemen. Earlier, the U.S. condemned the latest Houthi attack on a Saudi oil refinery in the capital, Riyadh. The UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Lebanon also condemned the attack, describing it as a threat to regional stability. China says the strategic dialogue with the United States was candid, constructive, and helpful. The two-day talks marked the first high-level contact between the two countries since President Joe Biden took office.
Talking to media after the conclusion of 3 rounds of tough and direct talks in Alaska, China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi said some important differences still persist. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Beijing hopes Washington will meet it halfway with mutual respect. Wang reiterated that sovereignty and territorial integrity are major issues of principle. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the two sides had a very candid conversation on an expansive agenda. Talking to reporters, Blinken said the world's top economies found areas where their interests overlap. He added these include Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, and climate change.
U.S. prosecutors have charged 10 Iranian nationals over an alleged long-running scheme to dodge sanctions on Tehran. They tried to disguise $300 million in transactions, including the purchase of 2 oil tankers. All 10 defendants have been charged with conspiracy to violate legal sanctions against Iran. The prosecutors said the 8 men and 2 women are outside the U.S. and have not been arrested. They said the defendants conspired to abuse the U.S. financial system to conduct transactions on behalf of the Iranian government. The U.S. government has also filed a civil forfeiture action seeking more than $157 million. In Iraq, a civilian has been killed and 2 security personnel injured after a bomb blast in northern Saladin province. No group has yet claimed responsibility, but authorities suspect ISIS was behind the attack. Security forces have launched a manhunt for the perpetrators. Since the start of this year, ISIS terrorists have stepped up attacks, particularly in areas between Kirkuk, Saladin, and Diyala. 13 people have been killed and several others wounded in several attacks in Nigeria's northwestern Kano state. Authorities say the gunmen attacked communities in the Zangon, Kataf, Karuru, and Chikun areas of the state. They said assailants razed 56 houses, 16 motorcycles, and burned several barns. Officials said troops were mobilized to repel the attacks. The gangs, locally known as bandits, burn and ransack villages and target schools for kidnappings for ransom. Turkey has told the EU it has maintained a constructive approach in the Mediterranean despite provocations from Greece and Cyprus. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan held a virtual meeting with the European Union chiefs.
Tensions have flared over a dispute between Turkey and Greece over maritime jurisdiction in the Mediterranean. In the meeting, the Turkish presidency said Erdogan repeated a proposal for a regional Eastern Mediterranean conference. In a statement, it said the president expects a result from the upcoming EU summit that will pave the way for concrete efforts to move forward. Erdogan said the migrant burden on Turkey is rising. In a separate statement, the European Commission said it underlined the importance of sustained de-escalation. Meanwhile, the Turkish Coast Guard said they found 3 migrants dead in waters of the Aegean coastal town of Sisme after Greek Coast Guard beat them. The Greek Coast Guard rejected accusations, saying they do not treat migrants or people in danger that way.
The International Criminal Court has sent notifications to Israel and Palestine of the opening of a war crimes probe. In a statement, the prosecutor's office said the parties have 1 month to seek a deferral. Earlier this month, the ICC prosecutor Fatua Bensouda said she would formally investigate war crimes in the Palestinian territories. While Palestinian Authority welcomed the announcement, Israel denounced it. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has affirmed its position on Israel remains unchanged. Saudi Minister of State of Foreign Affairs Abdul Al-Jaber said the recent normalization deals will pay off only if they change Israel's position with regard to the annexation of Palestinian territory. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. President Joe Biden has deplored a recent surge in anti-Asian violence in the United States. This comes after a deadly shooting rampage in Georgia left 8 people dead, including 6 women of Asian descent. During a visit to Georgia, Biden met leaders and state lawmakers from the Asian American community. Speaking after the meeting, Biden asked all Americans to stand together against hate. Vice President Kamala Harris, who is of Asian American descent, also accompanied the president. Harris said racism, xenophobia, and sexism have always been real in America.
Over the past year, 3,800 such incidents have been reported. 2 of 3 by women. Everything from physical assaults to verbal accusations. And it's all harmful. And sadly, it's not new. Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in America, and always has been. Sexism, too.
The U.S. and Chinese ambassadors to the United Nations have clashed over racism. The argument took place during a General Assembly meeting to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said racism continues to be a daily challenge. However, she added for millions of people in countries like China and Myanmar, it is deadly. In response, China's Deputy UN Ambassador Dai Bing said the United States has no license to tell other countries what to do. Dai said Thomas-Greenfield admitted to her country's ignorable human rights record. He called on the U.S. to address racial discrimination, social injustice, and police brutality on its soil. The U.S. has called on Somalia to hold transparent and inclusive elections as soon as possible to end the deadlock. In a statement, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on all stakeholders to set aside narrow political objectives. He urged them to safeguard the country's future and find an agreement to conduct parliamentary and presidential polls. He said the current impasse undermines progress made and hinders the fight against terrorism. Somalia missed a deadline to hold an election by the February 8th, sparking a constitutional crisis. In Peru, heavy rain, floods, and mudslides have cut off communities and left families homeless in the northern Peru region. More than 3,600 families in the remote mountainous area are left stranded after 5 bridges collapsed. The locals say they have no access to drinking water and electricity. Authorities say the homeless may have to be permanently relocated to avoid similar incidents in the future. Housing Minister Solange Fernandez toured the region to assess the damage. In Australia's New South Wales, a potentially life-threatening downpour has forced multiple evacuation orders from authorities. The rains have flooded rivers and streets, cut power lines, and caused a major Sydney dam to spill over. Officials say they had issued 9 evacuation orders for about 15 areas. Emergency services said a mini tornado ripped through a suburb in the west of Sydney, causing damage to more than 30 homes. Most of the coast of the state has already seen March rainfall records broken, but authorities warned the downpour is likely to continue for several days. In Iceland, a volcano has erupted near the capital, Reykjavik, following weeks of seismic activity. The country's meteorological office says the fissure took place near Fagradalsfjall mountain on Reykjanes Peninsula. Authorities said the eruption posed no immediate danger to people or critical infrastructure. The weather agency said aviation is not expected to suffer either, as the volcano will not spew out much ash or smoke. The last eruption on the AFGHAN Peninsula was some 800 years ago. Iceland has also recorded more than 40,000 earthquakes in the past 3 weeks. Turkey has withdrawn from an international accord designed to protect women despite objections from campaigners. The Istanbul Convention seeks to prevent, prosecute, and eliminate domestic violence. It signed the Council of Europe's convention 10 years ago at its launch in Istanbul. Turkish conservatives argue its principles undermine family values, but Europe's top human rights body has described the decision as devastating for efforts to combat domestic violence. Turkey's Family Minister Zahra Zumrut said women's rights are protected by the country's constitution. Social media platforms WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Instagram suffered a brief service outage across the globe. All three platforms belong to the U.S.-based social media giant Facebook. Outage tracking website Down Detector showed nearly 1 million people reporting issues with Instagram. It said 20,000 users posted about problems with WhatsApp on the website. Facebook attributed to the outage of unspecified technical issues and apologized to users. However, a spokesperson for the company said it resolved the issue, which prevented access to services. French daredevil Valentin Deluc took to the sky with some death-defying stunts at an abandoned ski resort in France. More in this report.
Deluc turned the deserted Evoria resort into his own personal playground as he sped right across it. All geared up, he first took off from the snow-capped mountains to paraglide over and through the resort. While in the air, he launched off the rooftops and even ground his skis on a chairlift cable. He then landed to put on some insane ground tricks, including a backflip through an igloo, while keeping his glider intact on the ground. He again lifted off to the sky by fastening a ride from a horse-drawn sleigh. The 28-year-old started as an alpine free skier and paraglider before combining the two disciplines to master the field of speed riding. Deluc dominated the tour in 2014.
In Turkey, a tropical-looking turquoise lake in southwestern town of Yatagan worries environmentalists. It contains heavy metals such as selenium, cadmium, boron, and others. More about this lake in this report.
Known as an ash dam, the toxic lake is composed of wastewater and polluted ash that are generated by the nearby Yatagan power plant. Locals fear the metals leaking into the earth and groundwater will cause health problems.
Its beauty is coming from its toxic structure, so it doesn't look beautiful to the residents of the village, of the surrounding village, or to the environmentalists. So actually that's the reason it's being a toxic lake. It's not a natural one.
Campaigners say pollution from the coal mine and burn at Yatagan has led to major environmental damage. Ash Dam is one of the 15 wastewater lakes in Turkey that defy to stop from causing further damage to nature.
The coal plants were allowed to operate without the disposal sites meeting no environmental standards or criteria. So that's why it's a very important decision, and we hope that the final decision of the court will be as such. And yeah, this decision will give the public authorities the power of shutting down, stopping the operation of those irresponsibly operating coal plants.
Earlier this month, the campaigners won a legal victory. The State Council issued a decision cancelling a law that postpones filtration requirements in thermal power plants. As per the decision, all thermal power plants that operate without modernized filters will have to stop their operations until they meet the standards.
In the U.S. state of Texas, a federal jury has directed Apple to pay over $300 million to personalize media communications. The tech giant was charged with infringing a patent related to digital rights management. The licensing firm sued Apple in 2015, alleging that the firm's iTunes service infringed 7 of its patents. Apple successfully challenged the personalized media communications case at the U.S. Patent Office, but an appeals court reversed that decision in March last year and paved the way for the trial. However, the iPhone maker says it is disappointed with the ruling and will appeal. It's now time to take a look at the weather around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at indus.news.